organic farming, horticulture, and how we grow our food. Kimberly asked that I do a video on industrial farming and how it differs from traditional farming. And a couple of other people asked about why I'm so anti-horticulture or organic farming. So I'm just going to do this all as one big video. Industrial farming is bad. We kind of all know this. But I think a lot of people think that agriculture and industrial farming are the same thing, and they're not. They couldn't be more different than agriculture and horticulture. Horticulture is really the oldest farming mechanism. Horticulture is about growing enough stuff for you and your family. And it works great if everyone has a plot of land and only has a small amount of surplus. So the pioneers, they did a lot of horticulture type things. You know, you throw up a homestead, you farm the land using horticulture, and you grow the things that you need to get through the year, and you're basically a little self-sustained little pod. That doesn't work well for all of society. When we moved into cities, horticulture stopped working because we couldn't all grow our own food because we lived in cities and we didn't have large plots of land big enough for our families. Agriculture solved that problem by specializing in what you could grow the most efficiently in your plot of land, and then trading with somebody who could grow something else more efficiently on their plot of land. You were able to create a surplus, and you could sell to those in the cities. And so agriculture is what allowed us to get to civilization. Industrial farming is farming for pure profit, and you worry about quarter-to-quarter earnings, yearly earnings, and you don't worry about the sustainability because your goal is to be as profitable over a window of time as possible. The problem with industrial farming is that land then becomes a commodity and something that you are willing to move from plot to plot, knowing that you could sell the land for something else afterwards. So you might farm something, put pigs on it, put cows on it, whatever, until it's unusable for you anymore, and then sell it to a home developer that's going to put up a fun park or a shopping mall or homes. And that's what the land is going to be used for. So it's very hard on the land because you start viewing land as something that's consumable as opposed to something that has to be maintained. Agriculture, like my family did, I don't do agriculture, but I grew up on a farm and I still go home to the farm. But agriculture, like many of the people in the farming community I grew up in, had to be about sustainability. People will quote that agriculture destroys the land in 15 years. Bullshit. I grew up on a bicentennial farm. It had been a farm for 200 years. And that was not a horticulture farm, that was an agriculture farm. And it meant that you had to maintain the land, you had to understand what was going on, because the only thing you had was your land. And that was how you were going to make money for the next 20 years and how your kids were expected to make money for the 20 years after that. And so you had to be very good at managing resources. People talk about, oh, we need to go back to the way that the Indians did it with horticulture because the Indians knew how to maintain the land. Well, farmers are much better at it than the Indians were because they were trying to build a surplus. They were really focusing on, I'm going to make enough to make it through the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. And most of the Native Americans that we're supposed to go back to, their styles, nothing against the Native Americans, but they wandered from place to place. There weren't so many of them that if they screwed up the land in one spot that they couldn't move to somewhere else, Or a lot of them just moved because they followed the game, and when the game moved, they moved. So agriculture is actually much more sustainable than most of the horticulture mechanisms. And so when we talk about organic sustainable, we get into this weird spot where you can have organic farming that is or isn't sustainable, and you can have organic industrial farming, and you can have organic horticulture, and you can have organic agriculture. So organic simply means that you've agreed not to use certain types of chemicals. And it doesn't necessarily mean that any of the chemicals that are used are safer. It just means that they are more likely naturally occurring. So in modern agriculture, lots of times we use Roundup and insecticides and those kinds of things. And Roundup is one of those things that's a little iffy. It does breed stronger and stronger weeds every year because more and more of the weeds become Roundup tolerant. The same is true of organic farming. The weed killers that you would use are naturally derived, but certain weeds aren't going to respond to them. And so you're really trading chemicals for manpower. And that doesn't work for certain types of crops. You're not going to go through and weed a cornfield or a wheat field. It just, you can't do it. So organic wheat is really hard to grow because you can't apply something that's going to kill grass, that isn't going to kill the wheat, that is organic, and you can't go down the rows because wheat grows, a ½ inch apart from itself. And so there's no good way to go through and weed wheat farms. So to say that we're going to have organic wheat is going to be really, really hard in a sustainable, long-term, scalable way that we could feed the entire planet. So, organic is good for certain types of things. Yes, organic tomatoes taste better than the mass-produced agricultural tomatoes. They taste better. Are they better for you? Probably. They probably do have more nutrients. Is it because they're not a hybrid? Maybe. Lots of times when we produce larger vegetables, we have less flavorful vegetables. So the breeds that we're breeding for size, for ketchup, and for pasta sauce, and for tomato paste, and for industrial kinds of uses, organic doesn't really make a lot of sense. It might add a little bit of flavor, but for the most part, the wear and tear that it's going to put on the earth because of the less efficient growth of those plants is likely going to offset any benefit that you got by not growing with a hybrid version. Lastly, it really comes down to how many people do you have to feed, how many people are willing to work on those farms, and what scale do you need to be. If we switched over to industrial farming, we could have fewer farms and fewer land, and we would just have to say, here is the 100-year track of this farm's going to live here for 5 years, it's going to move here for 5 years, it's going to move here for 5 years, it's going to move here for 5 years, and at 20 years we could go back to that first plot of land. And we could feed a lot more people, and it probably actually would be lower impact on the planet. You wouldn't want to be near those farms because industrial cow farms smell nasty. They're not very humane to the animals. They're probably cruel to the animals. There's a lot of reasons to be anti-industrial farm, but to say it's not sustainable is really about how long-term do you look and what resources are you optimizing for. The whole world evolves around oil right now. And the price of goods is really a function of how much effort goes into growing them. And so the environmental impact of most things is measured in its price. The more expensive the same product is, chances are the higher its impact was. Because that tomato that's organically grown probably had 30 people going to that farm by car and had more labor and supported more households than the one that was not organic, that was grown in a traditional farm and was managed by 4 people and 4 households. And the one that's absolutely dirt cheap from the industrial farm had the least amount of labor, the least amount of shipping, and the least amount of supported people. And when you really zoom out on what all of the resources that went into the item are, it really boils down to how much energy was put in, and that comes down to oil for the most part in the US. And so the price of most objects is a measure of its environmental impact when comparing two objects of similar type. There you go.